a car accident, and I ended up as the supporting character in a CEO romance novel, the ex-wife of the protagonist. Thinking about the miserable fate of the original wife, I quickly signed my own name on the divorce agreement. The CEO's face turned dark. Sonia, have you really thought this through? My heart skipped a beat, and I tightly held onto my purse. Just kidding. There's no way I'm giving back a single penny of the exorbitant divorce settlement. Chapter 1. After lying in the hospital bed for 3 days, I finally accepted the reality of transmigration. I, Sonia, an ordinary female college student, transmigrated into the role of a malicious supporting character in a cliché CEO romance novel. I am the ex-wife of the CEO, taking advantage of my wealthy and influential family to do as I pleased. At the university opening ceremony, I fell in love at first sight with the male lead, George, and relentlessly pursued him, using every means to force him into marriage with me. George, the typical campus romance male lead, handsome and outstanding, came from a poor background. His father was deaf and mute, and his mother had kidney disease. To raise money for his mother's medical expenses, he chose to compromise and marry me. In our 5-year marriage, George transformed from a silent and unknown employee into a rising star in the business world. However, our relationship deteriorated over time. George gradually broke free from my control, but I remained ignorant and arrogant until I pushed him, the love of his life, down the stairs, causing him to break his leg. Unable to bear it any longer, George asked for a divorce. That's when the car accident happened. It wasn't until the 3rd day that George came to see me, throwing the divorce agreement directly at me. Sonia, have you had enough? His voice was cold, filled with impatience and disgust. But even so, when I caught a glimpse of his face, my heart skipped a beat. No wonder the original host was crazy. Damn, this face is so handsome. Then, I glanced at the divorce agreement and saw the amount of property I could claim. My heart stopped abruptly. I hit the jackpot. The original host's family was wealthy, but she had a younger brother who would inherit the company, leaving her with nothing. On the other hand, George had achieved considerable success in just a few years of entrepreneurship, with substantial assets. Once we divorced, the settlement would be astonishing. I had led a virtuous and charitable life, and this was the deserving outcome of my sudden wealth. After calculating the money I could get, I suppressed my excitement, lowered my head in silence for a long time, afraid that a smile would betray my true intentions to George. Then, I took a deep breath. Fine, I agree to the divorce. George was taken aback. He probably didn't expect me to agree so readily. But seize the opportunity when it presents itself. Before he could regain his composure, I swiftly signed my name on the divorce agreement. George seemed to sense something was wrong, his eyebrows furrowing. I turned my head away, wiped away the non-existent tears from the corners of my eyes, and softly spoke, my heart is lifeless as ashes. I've come to my senses, George. Let's forgive each other. There was silence behind me for a while. It wasn't until I was about to count my savings in bed again that I noticed George was silently looking at the divorce agreement, motionless. Curiously, I asked, aren't you leaving yet? George raised his gaze. I gently reminded him. Mary's injury hasn't healed yet, right? Shouldn't you go and check on her? George's face suddenly turned grave. Chapter 2. I'm a little worried. Could this man be regretting giving me so much money? But my name is already signed, he can't deny it. Besides, considering how understanding I am now, it's only right that he gives me money. When George was in college, there was a girl named Mary. Unlike the arrogant and spoiled Miss, Mary was beautiful, gentle, and sensible. She came from a single-parent family, and their conditions weren't great, but she herself was very ambitious and excelled in all aspects. In a way, she and George were the same kind of people, and only she could understand him, being his soulmate. If it weren't for me, they would have naturally ended up together and created a happy family in this city. After graduating from college, I ruined everything. In the original story, Sonia was insanely jealous of Mary, constantly causing trouble and even pushing her to the point of madness. Later on, George completely grew tired of Sonia and broke ties with her. Just think about it, if I offend both the male and female leads, how miserable will be my fate as the vicious supporting character. So, I better take the money and run while I can. George finally stormed out of the door. I patted my chest and smirked. He sure has a temper. But then, I thought about the assets I could get, and I became happy again. I couldn't wait to open the online shopping website and plan to buy everything after I got discharged from the hospital. Just as I was thinking that, I suddenly received an AE chat message on my phone from Charlie. I heard that George finally came to see you today. His words were full of mockery. Charlie is Sonia's childhood friend, a playboy who excels in indulging in food and entertainment. He doesn't like George, and George doesn't like him either. They are very hostile towards each other, especially after I got married to George. Our families had frequent interactions, and Charlie's father belittled him more than once, causing Charlie to be even more annoyed with George. He called me a love-struck fool and constantly made me go to his vegetable garden to dig vegetables. This time, he's obviously here to see me make a fool of myself again. But do I care? Come on, I'm busy getting rich and counting my money. I don't have time to dwell on love and heartbreak. Yeah, I thought for a moment and directly sent him the divorce agreement. From today, I'm single again. Take me out for dinner. He immediately called me, and his first words were, "Have you gone crazy?" TSK, he's so rude. I'll go to the Civil Affairs Bureau to get it stamped once I'm discharged. Fortunately, my car accident wasn't too serious, just a minor head injury and a mild concussion. Don't you have anything to say? Charlie remained silent for a moment, then suddenly laughed. All right. And what does Miss Sonia want as compensation? Me? I heard you opened a new bar. A week later, I put on a strapless sequin dress and gracefully left the hospital. Charlie bit his cigarette and casually threw a coat over to me. Put this on. You don't look presentable wearing this in the hospital. I rolled my eyes at him. What do you know? Today is a good day. Charlie ignored me and turned to leave, unexpectedly bumping into George on his way out. George's gaze stopped at the coat on my shoulder, his expression turning cold. You're here. I walked over, smiling at him. Where's the car? George's expression softened slightly. In the parking lot. Let's go. Charlie couldn't stand it and squinted at me. Sonia, aren't you going in my car? I waved my hand. Oh no. I have to go to the Civil Affairs Bureau with George to get the divorce certificate. It's more convenient to take his car. Saying that, I urged the suddenly stiff George, why are you standing there? Let's go. Chapter 3, Charlie smiled and said, yeah, you're right. This is serious business. No time to waste. George sarcastically pulled the corner of his mouth and said, Sonia, are you so eager to distance yourself from me? Wasn't it you who asked for the divorce? What's with your snide remarks? I honestly replied, I have other plans for tonight, so I thought it would be better to resolve this early and not waste your time. George was always busy, and he rarely came home on weekdays. I knew he didn't want to see me, and I had no intention of continuing to entangle with him. Everyone should go their separate ways, live their own lives. Isn't that great? George turned away with a cold face. On a weekday, the Civil Affairs Bureau wasn't crowded, and it didn't take long for George and me to be called. Just as we were about to go in, George's phone suddenly rang. I glanced at it from the corner of my eye, it was Mary. George stepped aside to answer the call, and I faintly heard him speaking gently and patiently. Still outside. Something came up. He had never spoken to Sonia with such a tone before. This marriage was forced from the beginning. 5 long years of constant conflict, we couldn't even have a proper meal together, let alone this kind of caring conversation. The staff urged us, are you going to proceed or not? I shook my head, feeling a bit sorry for the original owner. In George's heart, she really didn't have any place at all. George, I called out to him, can we handle my matter first? This time, George, he always put Mary first. No matter how much Sonia cried or made a scene, he remained indifferent. The original owner was also foolish, actually thinking she could win over Mary. Wasn't that asking for trouble? George as well, if he deals with me first this time, he can openly be with his beloved Mary sooner, right? George's expression suddenly froze. Then he said to the person on the phone, "Let Dr. Zhang take a look first. I'll be there soon." 20 minutes later, I held the freshly printed divorce certificate, tears welling up in my eyes. I got it. I got my huge separation fee. From today onwards, shopping, traveling, drinking, I will live as a happy person. I sincerely said to George, "George, thank you. Goodbye. Thank you for your money, and I won't see you again." I walked out and immediately saw Charlie. He was driving a flashy red Ferrari, very eye-catching, hard to miss. I happily walked over with small, quick steps. I have money. I want to spend. Suddenly, I heard George's somewhat hesitant voice from behind. "Sonia." I hurriedly turned around. "Do you have something else?" George's gaze was dark, his emotions unclear for a moment. If it were the original owner, upon seeing his obvious change in emotions, she would definitely dig deeper and ask for a clear explanation. But I was too lazy to pretend. "No, I'm leaving." I quickened my pace. As a cannon fodder like me, the key to happiness is to distance myself from the main characters as soon as possible. When I left in Charlie's car, I took a quick glance at the rearview mirror, and there was George standing there, surrounded by people, inexplicably lonely. Without me, this troublemaker bothering him, he finally found relief, right? Charlie glanced at me, reluctant. I enthusiastically replied, "Keep all the cute guys in your store for me, okay?" Chapter 4, Charlie was speechless. "I really wasted my efforts on you. I used to think you loved him so much, but after this divorce, you have a happy expression on your face." "Oh, is it that obvious?" I glanced at the rearview mirror and carefully examined myself. Sonia, now 28 years old, although she suddenly aged 10 years, fortunately, her face is still beautiful and radiant, and most importantly, she's rich. I thought for a moment and gave an explanation. If he doesn't love me, then I might as well stop loving him. In the gap between traffic lights, Charlie turned to look at me for a while, until I felt a chill down my spine. He finally spoke with an ambiguous tone, "You seem like a different person after this car accident." My heart skipped a beat, and I remained quiet for a moment, shrugging my shoulders. Perhaps experiencing life and death makes people see things differently. Charlie was dumbfounded, but after a moment, he smiled too. "You have a point. All right, tonight I'll treat you." 2 hours later, Charlie regretted it. He frowned. Still not enough. He wasn't referring to the drinks, but rather the attractive guys in the bar. "Oh no. I mean the younger brothers." I raised my glass to him. "Come on, have a drink with me." "Charlie," I patted his shoulder and pointed to the group of handsome younger brothers, "Look, they are all sweet talkers and good-looking, aren't they? Better than my ex-husband." The original me was the same, with so many handsome guys in the world, and she had both money and looks. Why did she have to fixate on that one tree? People, they're afraid of getting stuck in their ways. Charlie chuckled, "You finally stopped being blind." A slim and handsome younger brother came over to pour me a drink, very obediently. "Sister, try this." "Sure, why not?" I was about to happily accept it, but Charlie snatched it away. "No mixing drinks for you. You just got out of the hospital, and I don't want to call 911 for you later." Saying that, he glanced at the guy who turned pale instantly and quickly apologized, "Sorry, sister, I didn't know you." I waved my hand generously. "It's all right. Today, sister is happy." Then, I glanced at Charlie with a teasing tone, "You only officials are allowed to set fires, but not the common people? When your girlfriends feed you drinks, you're happy, but when it comes to me, it's not allowed?" Charlie laughed in exasperation. "Is that comparable? Why not? I'm a newly minted rich woman. I can do whatever I want." Suddenly, Charlie asked, "By the way, does your family know about this?" I froze for a moment. Oh damn, I forgot about that. Before I could say anything, Charlie looked like he had already figured it all out. "I knew you wouldn't dare to tell them." "It's not that I didn't want to, but I didn't dare. The original me didn't have a good relationship with my family. They were traditional and favored boys over girls. They were stubborn, and she was rebellious. They had a lot of conflicts. When she decided to marry George, later, when George became successful, their attitude towards her did a complete 180, blaming her for constantly arguing with George. Anyway, those days as the malicious supporting character weren't easy either. But with the divorce certificate in hand, what do I have to fear? The following days were even happier than I had imagined. I had my aunt pack and send all of George's things away. This villa was originally bought by the original me's parents as their wedding house, but George didn't like staying here overnight. Perhaps every corner reminded him of the humiliation Sonia once brought him. At first, he mostly stayed at his office, but as his career took off, he bought an apartment near the office. I went there once, and coincidentally, I ran into Mary. How awkward, you tell me. Although Mary immediately explained that she was only seeking shelter from the rain temporarily, how could Sonia not be angry with her temper? They had a big fight that time and didn't speak to each other for a month. In the end, it was Sonia who couldn't bear it and took the initiative to compromise. Who made her have George in her eyes and heart? Sigh. But now, things were different. This luxurious 3-story villa was all mine. George didn't have much here, but after clearing it out, it still felt a bit empty. So, I immediately went shopping, and then I started to give orders at my favorite stores. "Don't take this, this, and this, but please wrap up the rest for me." The store manager's face was beaming with joy. She was happy, and I was happy too. A few shop assistants followed behind me, helping me carry the items. Unexpectedly, as soon as we stepped out, we ran into George. When he saw me, he was taken aback, and I had already spotted Mary standing right behind him. Chapter 5. It seems like her leg injury has almost healed if she can come to the mall like this. George's lips moved, and he took the initiative to speak. "Her mother's birthday is coming up, so I'm here to help her pick a gift." I blinked. Oh, why is he telling me this? I don't care. Out of politeness, I still nodded politely, but before I could take a step to say goodbye, Mary spoke up. She seemed a bit apologetic in her expression. "Sonia, I'm sorry. My leg is still not very convenient, so I asked George to help me come here. I see you've bought a lot of things. Is it difficult for you to carry them? Why don't you let George drive you? I'll be fine on my own. Listen, what do you call the art of conversation?" She's reminding George that I pushed her, implying that I shouldn't be jealous, and generously offering George to me. I smiled and said, "No need. My car is downstairs. Besides, it's a private matter. No need to trouble George." Mary widened her eyes slightly. What? I was surprised too and looked at George. "George, haven't you told Mary that we're divorced?" Silence. Mary looked at George in astonishment. George clenched his jaw, his face not looking good. I don't like to publicize personal matters. So he's talking behind my back? Didn't I throw a few divorce celebration parties? Why is he being so petty? Mary seemed taken aback by this bombshell, and she opened her mouth. "George, you and Sonia, you didn't tell me? Why didn't you say anything?" Upon hearing her voice, George seemed to remember that she was there too. His eyebrows twitched, and after a moment's pause, he explained in a low voice, "I've been busy lately." He used to use this excuse to brush off Sonia, but who would have thought that the tables would turn and Mary would also receive this treatment? But the main character and the supporting role are different after all. For Mary, this sentence is a huge piece of good news. Her gaze circled between me and George, and she stuck out her tongue apologetically, seemingly saying, "Sorry, I didn't know before. I didn't mention it on purpose." "Sonia, you don't mind, do you?" Of course, I don't mind. He's just a man I have no connection with anymore. You two go ahead and enjoy. I'll leave now. Just as I took a step, George suddenly said, "Wait." I turned back. Does George have something else to say? George furrowed his brow, seeming not accustomed to the sudden change in my attitude. Mom said you haven't visited her in a long time. George's voice lowered, as if it was difficult to say, but he had no choice. If you have time, go see her. He was referring to his mother, who had kidney disease. Unlike George, his mother had always liked Sonia. Because George had never told her that he was forced to marry Sonia, in the old woman's heart, Sonia, the daughter of a wealthy family, didn't mind marrying into the George's modest conditions and wholeheartedly devoted herself to George. Now, naturally, she saw Sonia in a favorable light. During the early days of their marriage, to please George, Sonia had always taken the initiative to take care of his mother, winning her favor. She knew this was her last bargaining chip. George was filial, and even if it was just for this, he wouldn't easily break ties with her. But when Sonia laid hands on Mary, crossing his bottom line, she lost this last trump card. I thought for a moment and agreed. Okay, tomorrow then. After all, the old woman hadn't done anything wrong. George's expression relaxed, and he naturally continued, "Then I'll come to pick you up tomorrow morning." I smiled at him and jingled the car keys. No need. I have hands and feet. I can move around easily. I'll drive myself, so you don't have to bother, George. George and Mary's expressions froze at the same time. Chapter 6. Early the next morning, I set off for the nursing home. This upscale nursing home is located in the suburbs, with excellent facilities and good service. Of course, it comes with a hefty price tag. The caregiver noticed me and politely greeted me. She was someone George had hired, aware of the strained relationship between George and me, which made her distant towards me as well. George's mother was lying in bed, her body frail and emaciated from years of suffering from kidney disease, but fortunately, her condition had improved somewhat during her time in the nursing home. The caregiver's gaze briefly lingered on the food box in my hands, and she sneered with a hint of disdain. Even a caregiver looks down on my attempts to please because she knows that no matter what I do, it will only provoke George's disgust. Sonia. George's mother saw me, and a gentle smile appeared on her face. Have you been busy lately? It's been a while since I last saw you. I sighed inwardly. Sonia had only used her from beginning to end, but she took it to heart. The old woman hadn't done anything wrong. Yes, a little bit. I brought you some chicken soup. You can have it later. However, George's mother held onto my hand, looked at me for a while, and cautiously asked, "Did George's child upset you again?" I shook my head, but George's mother didn't believe me. She sighed helplessly. George has always been stubborn since he was young, and he likes to keep things to himself. If he upsets you, you tell Mom, and Mom will talk to him for you. I felt even more guilty. I had planned to tell her about the divorce, but now it was stuck in my throat, and I couldn't bring myself to say it. I had a meal with George's mother and talked with her for a while before leaving. Before I left, I hesitated for a long time and finally mustered the courage to say, I will continue to be busy for some time, so I'm afraid I won't be able to come and accompany you often. First, I'll reduce the frequency and then find a suitable time to tell her. It should be much better that way. I can't keep it a secret forever. I'm willing to, but George won't agree. If I come too often, he'll probably think I still have ulterior motives. George's mother patted my hand and let out a soft sigh. Sonia, you're a good child. What happened before was George's fault. Even though he never mentioned it to me, I know he feels guilty and regrets it. He loved you so much, and losing the child, how could he not be in pain? My heart skipped a beat. The child, yes, that was the catalyst that completely shattered the relationship between Sonia and George. Chapter 7. Yes, Sonia actually had a child before. She conceived the child using all means possible while George was out drinking and socializing. In any case, the arrival of this child was not so straightforward, but in Sonia's eyes, it was the most powerful weapon to keep George by her side. After discovering the pregnancy, George felt guilty towards Mary, the moonlight, on one hand, and on the other hand, he couldn't let go of his own flesh and blood. In the end, he chose the child. His own childhood had been difficult enough, so he couldn't bear for his child to be born into a broken family. During that time, it was when his relationship with Sonia was at its best. He would buy nutritional supplements for Sonia and read many parenting guides. He truly wanted to be a good father. That's why he got so angry when he found out that Sonia intentionally had an abortion. This whole situation is quite bizarre. After Sonia became pregnant, she felt that George's attitude was improving, so she took advantage of it and wanted him to be by her side all the time. Every time George tried to refuse, she would pretend to be unwell, forcing George to compromise. After this happened several times, George could naturally see through her tricks. One time, Sonia called George again, saying that her stomach was hurting and asking George to come home quickly. But that day, Mary suddenly had a high fever, and George was at the hospital taking care of her, so he didn't go back home. Sonia, are you not tired of playing the story of the boy who cried wolf? His voice over the phone was calm, but it thoroughly annoyed Sonia. In a fit of anger, she actually went to the hospital and had the child aborted. She wanted to make George realize that the wolf really would come. As you can imagine, this incident completely shattered their relationship, causing chaos and turmoil. If before this, George was disgusted with Sonia, then after this, hatred was added to the mix. He never set foot in their marital home again and had no contact with Sonia whatsoever until Sonia went to find Mary and pushed her off the building. That was the final straw that broke the camel's back. Well, it's no wonder the original owner went crazy. When they get ruthless, they spare no one, not even themselves. I fell silent for a while and said, it's all in the past. The original Sonia is already dead, and these matters have come to an end. Coming out of the nursing home, I felt a bit emotional. I wasn't sure if it was for George's mother or for the original Sonia. And then, this emotional state reached its peak when I realized that I had accidentally lost my car keys. The book mentioned before that Sonia was malicious and self-destructive, but it didn't say anything about her being forgetful. In despair, I called Charlie. Pick me up. Hurry. Charlie found it outrageous. Am I your chauffeur? Do I have to be at your beck and call? I'm not refusing to pay you, I said. Charlie, this nursing home is quite remote, and it's inconvenient to get a taxi. Then Charlie reluctantly came, and by the time we got back home, it was already dark. To make matters worse, it started pouring rain. Looking at the heavy rain outside, I took pity on Charlie and let him stay, giving him the guest room on the second floor to sleep in. But unexpectedly, the next morning, someone rang the doorbell. Help, who calls for help so early in the morning? I groggily went to open the door. Why are you here? Standing outside the door was none other than George. He was about to speak when footsteps came from the stairs, and Charlie's voice carried clear annoyance from being woken up. Who is it? George's face instantly turned dark, and every word seemed to be squeezed out from between his teeth. It seems I came at the wrong time. I apologize for disturbing you. Chapter 8. My heart rolled its eyes. You know very well that you disturbed my peaceful sleep, right? And why are you making such a face? This is my house, all right? You're just an ex-husband. What right do you have to be angry and wear that expression of being wronged for everyone to see? You've been putting that hat on me for so long. I've already let it go. I turned to Charlie and said, there's nothing going on. Go back to sleep. Charlie, this spoiled young master, has a big temper. After all, he got stuck in the rain because of me, and I can't even guarantee him a good night's sleep. Charlie saw George and seemed to sober up a bit, lazily smiling. Oh, we have a guest. It would be impolite for me to go back to sleep. Sonia, why don't you invite him in? Me? See, I told you this man goes crazy when he hasn't slept well. I couldn't be bothered with him, so I looked at George again and had no intention of letting him in. I had just cleaned up his things, and I didn't want to dirty the house again. I'd have to trouble Auntie to clean it up later. It's early, George. Is there something you need? I asked. George's face turned slightly pale. It was obvious that Charlie's few words had hit a nerve, but he couldn't lose his temper. In the past, he could have simply kicked Charlie out as the master of the house, but now he couldn't even match Charlie, he couldn't even enter through the front door. But men like him can endure a lot, and George is no exception. He took a deep breath, ignored Charlie, and took out a key from his pocket to hand it over. You left it at my mom's place yesterday. She kept reminding me to bring it to you. Meaning he came here purely on his mother's behalf. Oh, thank you. Actually, you didn't have to go through the trouble. I have a spare key. I took the key and said. George was speechless for a moment. I waited a few seconds, but I was impatient. I gently reminded him, George, do you have something else? If George couldn't sense that I was rushing him, then he wouldn't have achieved his position today. He pressed his lips together. No. I closed the door directly. Charlie stood on the stairs, looking at me. I was puzzled. Aren't you going back to get some rest? Why are you staring at me like that? Charlie squinted his eyes slightly, arms crossed. It's nothing. I just feel you seem a bit heartless towards your ex-husband, he said lazily. I was extremely speechless. If you have nothing to say, you don't have to say anything. Charlie raised his chin. Sonia, don't tell me you can't see what he's thinking? I asked back, what is he thinking? Charlie leaned back, his voice lazy. He wants to see you, doesn't he? Otherwise, he wouldn't have come over so early in the morning just to deliver a car key, and his face wouldn't have turned so ugly when he saw Charlie in this house. I turned my head, and then Charlie tapped the railing with his finger, casually saying, don't you feel anything at all? What feeling? If he turns his head, and I rush up to him. I found it a bit funny. Yes, I do. Charlie looked over, his eyes flickering slightly, his back seemed to tense up. I shrugged. I feel like I should have divorced him much earlier. If I had known what kind of person he was, I should have given up on him sooner. I wasted so much of my time for nothing. Chapter 9, Charlie seemed surprised by my words and looked at me for a moment before suddenly laughing. All right, Sonia, you finally have some backbone. I was encouraged and couldn't help but compliment him back. Oh no. Not at all. You're far superior compared to me. He was the true player, untouched by the world. Charlie, how many times do I have to say it? I have no connection with those women. I quickly replied, I understand. Young master, it's just a performance with them. You haven't met your true destined woman yet. Isn't that how it goes in novels? The playboy always encounters his destined true love and repays the emotional debts from the past multiple times over. Charlie looked at me speechlessly, muttered, I knew I couldn't reason with you, you fool, and went back to sleep. I slept until the afternoon, only to be awakened by hunger. As I woke up, I noticed a bunch of missed calls and messages on my phone, all from the original owner's parents. After flipping through them for a while, I understood why they suddenly contacted me. They found out about my divorce from George. You got divorced from George? What were you thinking? How many times do I have to say it? George's company is thriving, and we are in talks for collaboration. What are we supposed to do now? You're a grown adult, yet so stubborn. You just decide to divorce without considering others. You're so selfish. I don't have a daughter like you. It was just the same old arguments back and forth. I looked at it for a while and then stopped. I went out to find something to eat. Smells so good. I stared dumbfounded at the sumptuous dishes on the table, as well as Charlie leisurely enjoying his food. Charlie, do you have any conscience? You're eating alone? Charlie raised an eyebrow. Do I have to let you go hungry? Well said, very convincing and irrefutable. I went straight over and used chopsticks to pick up my favorite fish-flavored shredded pork. Leaving aside everything else, Charlie was truly an expert when it came to food. The dishes he ordered for delivery were tastier than what others ordered. By the way, your parents called me. They said they've been trying to reach you, but you haven't been answering. Charlie suddenly said. I picked up a piece of braised pork ribs. I know. Charlie paused with his chopsticks, his gaze scanning my phone. Should I leave so you can talk to them? I waved my hand. No need. Let them say what they want. The deed is done, and they can't do anything about it. Just as I said that, the phone rang again, and I answered. Before I could say anything, the person on the other end started scolding me. Sonia, you need to go find George right now and tell him you were wrong. It was just a moment of impulsiveness. Beg him to reconcile with you. I listened to the sharp voice and moved the phone a bit farther away. Reconciliation? She really dared to think about it. Getting scolded or ending up in George's hands, which one was worse? I knew very well. Sonia, are you even listening to me? I finally found a moment to respond. I'm listening, but this is a difficult matter. Anyway, I can't handle it. The other end grew even more furious. Sonia, is this how you treat your parents? I wondered, didn't you say earlier that you didn't have a daughter like me? Did you forget? The other person was instantly speechless. She seemed like she wanted to scold me again, but I was too lazy to listen. I've already made myself clear. I'm busy. Let's talk another day. After saying that, I hung up and blocked the number. Charlie, who had witnessed this whole exchange, said nothing. Chapter 10, he put down his chopsticks and looked at me up and down for a moment, surprised. All right, Sonia, not only did you divorce your ex-husband, but now you're even daring to defy your parents. With a mouthful of food, I casually replied, where there's oppression, there's resistance. Charlie chuckled and leaned back in his chair. So does that mean one day it might be my turn? I raised my thumb, praising his self-awareness. I wasn't surprised by his reaction. Having grown up with the original Sonia, he knew her temperament and personality very well. From his perspective, the things I was doing now could probably be summarized in one sentence: I had gone crazy. But then again, if anyone had to deal with these messes, they would go crazy too. As a supporting character without the halo of the main character, it was better to run away early to save my life, right? Oh, by the way, can you help me find a new house? I said. This one is not bad, but it's annoying to be occasionally disturbed. Not just George, but also the whole family of the original Sonia, they were all troublemakers. Today, I completely broke ties with them. Who knows if they will come looking for trouble. I have no interest in dealing with them. Charlie understood and said, all right, leave it to me. Charlie truly lived up to his status as a qualified heir of a wealthy family. Although he spent most of his time eating, drinking, and having fun, when it came to important matters, he was reliable. The next day, he called me and said he had found a villa in the western part of the city. The previous owner of this house went abroad and urgently needs to sell it. The house has just been renovated, and no one has lived in it. I found a good deal for you. I was very satisfied with his efficiency. That day, I took Charlie to sign the contract with the homeowner and completed the transfer as quickly as possible. Then, I immediately put up a for sale sign on the previous house. I called a moving company, and a group of workers busily moved things up and down the stairs. I watched from the side and couldn't help wanting to facepalm. I didn't realize that there were so many belongings of the original Sonia. Shouldn't I charge her for processing them? Sonia, what's in this box? It's quite heavy, one of the workers asked, carrying a large cardboard box from the third floor. The box was tightly sealed, and I couldn't tell what was inside just by looking at it. I was about to go and take a look when I suddenly received a phone call. Hello, is this Sonia? This is the Third People's Hospital. Your husband suddenly collapsed on the way and was brought to the hospital. Can you come over quickly? Chapter 11. I was taken aback. George collapsed and was taken to the hospital? You must be mistaken. I am not his wife, I explained. The voice on the other end sounded surprised. But the note on the patient's phone. Oh, I remembered. When Sonia was pregnant before, she insisted on changing the note George had for her to Lady Sonia George. George couldn't argue with her, so he went along with it. I didn't expect that even after our divorce, he would forget to change it. How is his condition? I asked. The patient seems to have fainted due to low blood sugar. There is no immediate danger to his life, but his overall condition is not good. It would be best for you to come as soon as possible. I understand, but I'm a bit busy right now. Why don't you call his current girlfriend? Her name is Mary, and her number should be in the contacts list. If there's anything, you can directly contact her. I hung up the phone and saw that there were even more boxes in the living room. When will I finish tidying up all this? Let's just move everything for now. I'll sort it out when I have time. Luckily, the new house was spacious enough. I had the help of a housekeeper to roughly organize things, and then I went for a spot treatment and checked in at a newly opened popular barbecue restaurant. The taste was good, and the interior design was especially impressive. I couldn't help but take several photos and share them on my social media. Dining check-in. Today is also a day of giving up on dieting. I even included a beautiful selfie. After all, I had put on a full face of makeup. Friends started liking and commenting, and even Charlie, who usually didn't bother with social media, left a comment. This place is nice. I replied, have you been there? Charlie, of course. I opened it. Speechless. You managed to fool me, didn't you? But what I didn't expect was that Mary also left a comment. It was that kind of polite tone with underlying questions and a condescending attitude. Sonia, even though you are divorced from George, he is lying in the hospital right now, and you don't even bother to come and see him. Is that appropriate? Do you have some serious illness? Her comment caused an uproar in my social circle. Only a few people knew about my divorce from George, and I hadn't even figured out how to announce it yet. But here she was, taking the moral high ground. I responded sarcastically, a qualified ex should act as if they were dead. I'm just afraid of being misunderstood. If you don't mind, then I'll go. After all, we were classmates. It's only natural to visit each other, don't you think? My social media exploded, and people were furious. Then, after a while, Mary deleted her comment. Oh, so deleting it means pretending nothing happened? I immediately asked openly below, dear experts of social media, what would be an appropriate gift to bring when visiting my ex-husband and his current girlfriend? Please, it's really important to me. Chapter 12. An hour later, I went to the hospital carrying fruits. To my surprise, as soon as I arrived outside the ward, I heard Mary's choked voice. George, don't be angry. I know I was wrong this time, but I did it for you. George didn't respond. Mary's voice became more tearful. You fainted, and the hospital even called her, but she refused to come and see you even once. What if something happens to you today? It seemed like I had committed a grave mistake. Finally, George's tired voice came through. I'm a bit tired and want to be alone. After a moment, I heard the sound of a chair moving, and Mary came to the door. As soon as she opened it and saw me, she stood there in shock. George sensed something was wrong and turned his head to look. His face was pale, devoid of the usual commanding aura of a CEO, lying in bed with an 4-drip, showing a rare sign of weakness. When he saw me, his initially dull eyes brightened for a moment, seeming nervous yet unsure. Sonia, why are you here? He asked. I walked past Mary and entered. It's not like I can just ignore you after we recently divorced. In case people start gossiping about how heartless I am towards my ex-husband. We were university classmates. There's no need to make things so tense, right? George's face turned a shade of green, his lips tightly pressed. He must have seen the social media exchange between me and Mary, and as proud as he was, he couldn't tolerate being publicly ridiculed like this. It was simply humiliating. I could sense another layer of hatred towards me building up in his heart. Thinking about it made me annoyed. All right, now that I'm here, if there's nothing else, I'll leave, I said. A faint smile tugged at the corners of George's mouth. Sonia, do you have to be like this? He asked. I raised an eyebrow and sincerely questioned, like what? After I got into a car accident, you only came to see me on the third day. Compared to you, I've already been quite considerate, haven't I? When it comes to being ruthless, who can surpass the domineering male lead like you? George's face instantly turned gray. He opened his mouth, seemingly wanting to say something. Suddenly, my phone rang. It was a call from the housekeeper. Sonia, most of your things have been organized, but there's still one box left. It seems to contain some ceramics. How would you like to handle it? I was taken aback. Ceramics? Yes, and it looks like you made them yourself, so I thought I'd ask you. In my peripheral vision, I caught George's equally bewildered gaze. A flash of realization crossed my mind. Oh, I remembered. These ceramics were indeed made by the previous owner herself during college. George worked at a DIY pottery store, and back then, I would often visit just to be close to him. I didn't have the talent or patience for it, and all I had in my mind and heart was George. As a result, every time, I ended up covered in dirt, taking home a disgustingly ugly final product. I never got tired of it, completely oblivious to how embarrassing it was. Eventually, even George couldn't bear it and told me that what I was doing was wrong. Sonia immediately seized the opportunity to make a scene. Well, then why don't you teach me yourself? Of course, George didn't want to, but Sonia was a generous customer at the store, and he couldn't afford to offend her. It was only after George quit his job that Sonia finally stopped. That box of artworks was accumulated in this way. They're not important things. Just throw them away, I said nonchalantly. Chapter 13, Wait a minute, George suddenly spoke up. Did you move? I nodded. Yeah, George frowned. Where did you move to? Why so suddenly? I couldn't help but chuckle. George Gizong, how many times do I have to remind you? We're divorced. What I do, where I live, it's none of your business. George suddenly choked, as if he heard something he couldn't accept. His fists clenched tightly, veins popping. After a while, he seemed to finally relent and said in a low voice, if you don't want those ceramics, I'll send someone to pick them up. I looked at him curiously. Those are already mine. If I want them, I'll keep them. If I want to throw them away, I'll do that too. I don't know how those words hit George's sore spot, as the last glimmer of light in his eyes vanished, like a feeble flame in the wind, finally extinguished. Mary walked over with concern. George, are you okay? George slightly turned his head, avoiding her hand. Mary stood frozen in place, feeling awkward. But I had no interest in this drama, so I turned around to leave. Unexpectedly, just as I stepped outside, a doctor stopped me. Huh? I looked up and saw a woman doctor in her 40s examining me. Immediately, she seemed to recognize me and smiled, asking, are you feeling unwell recently? Here for a follow-up? I was a bit confused. Then I noticed the badge on her chest, Chief Obstetrician. A guess came to my mind. The only thing that connected Sonia to this doctor was the previous child. Thank you for your concern, but I'm fine. I'm here today to visit a friend, I replied vaguely. She seemed relieved. That's good. You've always had a weaker constitution, and the previous miscarriage had a significant impact on you. Please take extra care now. She glanced around. Didn't your partner come with you this time? I was stunned. These two simple sentences contained so much information. Miscarriage? A miscarriage? Wasn't Sonia intentionally aborting? How could it be a miscarriage? And the partner? Right, the one who arrived at the hospital first that time, it seemed to be Charlie. It seemed she misunderstood. George, what are you doing? Just as I was dumbfounded, Mary's exclamation came from behind. I turned around and saw George pulling out the needle himself, pushing Mary aside, and quickly walking towards us. He stared intensely at the female doctor, his voice unusually tense. What did you just say? The doctor was also taken aback by this situation. Who are you? George pressed his lips tightly, seemingly unsure how to answer that question. I explained briefly. He's my ex-husband. The person who came to the hospital with me before. Was my friend, not my partner. The doctor's eyebrows furrowed, seemingly incredulous. So that child is yours? Your wife had bleeding in the early stages of pregnancy, had a miscarriage, and you had no idea? Chapter 14, I can't remember how I got home because I was completely overwhelmed by this sudden news. I sat in the study for a while and couldn't help but lower my head, touching my flat abdomen. How could it be? The book clearly stated that Sonia intentionally aborted the child out of jealousy, but why did it turn into a miscarriage due to fetal demise? For some reason, thinking about this, I felt aching somewhere in my body. It's as if I can truly feel her lying on the cold operating table at that moment, that despair and pain. It made me even more uncomfortable. I shook my head, trying to shake off these emotions. The study had just been tidied up by the maid, so I flipped through and found a box specifically for storing university stuff. At the bottom, I found a college yearbook. If there was a deviation in the miscarriage incident from the novel, then maybe there are other differences elsewhere. I opened the first page, and there was a photo from military training. Under the blazing sun, a girl in military uniform with a bright smile stood on the podium. Behind her, a tall figure, although a bit far away, anyone with keen eyes could tell that it was George from our university days. A few lines of small text below. I suffered from heat stroke on the first day of military training, and a passing male student carried me to the infirmary and gave me a bottle of water. Sadly, he left quickly, and I didn't know how to thank him. It was only today that a classmate told me it turns out that person on the podium is him, so his name is George. A young girl secretly taking pictures of someone she likes, a normal operation. This should be when she first started liking George, right? I couldn't help but smile. Sonia liked George because of such a simple reason. I couldn't help but touch my face. The selfish and extreme Sonia in the book seemed different from this bright and radiant smile. It's hard to imagine that a girl with stars in her eyes would eventually become someone who would torment others. I continued flipping through, and I discovered that every photo was somehow related to George, his appearance in the lecture hall, wiping his sweat on the basketball court, eating alone in the cafeteria, earnestly working at the pottery shop. Occasionally, next to these photos, there were some brief comments. He chose such boring courses. I can't understand. Why is he good at studying and playing basketball? He always seems to eat alone, and he always chooses the cheapest dishes in the cafeteria. Is he satisfied? He always seems so busy. He doesn't even have time to talk to me. This turned out to be Sonia's memory book of her secret crush on George during her 4 years of college. She took many photos of him, accompanied by her ramblings. Every picture, every word, was completely different from the Sonia in the book. He seems to have someone he likes, but it's not me. What should I do? Maybe I should just give up. Tomorrow is the graduation ceremony. Should I confess to him and say goodbye to this secret crush? We were taking graduation photos when he suddenly left. I secretly followed him and found out that his mother's condition had worsened, and they needed a lot of money. What should he do? This page was supposed to have graduation photos, but it was blank because of George. Sonia also missed her own graduation photo. My hand trembled slightly. For some reason, I felt that this book was heavy, pressing down on me, making it difficult to continue reading it. It's as if something uncontrollable will happen if I continue to look further. It was a wedding photo.